Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are back for another section of Music 1300. I am, of course, your professor, Professor George. We are beginning a new unit today. Yes. In fact, this is one of my favorite units of the entire semester. And not to say that I haven't picked all of my favorite subjects to cover with you guys, but timbre or instrumental tone color is one of my favorite subjects. I think it is fascinating how the ear receives and perceives information, and we are very timbrally sensitive individuals. I know you guys all know your friends' voices, and being able to distinguish like one friend from another, even when like speaking or singing, is the idea of being a timbrally sensitive individual. So timbre refers to instrumental tone color, the way a particular instrument sounds. And like I said, like if I had a piano in this room and a tuba, they would be able to both play the same pitch class, the same note in the same register, but how they are accenting something we call the overtone series is greatly going to change our perception of what these instruments actually sound like. So today, for today's lecture, we are going to cover just one instrumental family, and that is the string family. And we're going to do so by serving the string quartet. A quartet has 4 members in it, so we're going to talk about this chamber ensemble, a group that does not require a conductor, and figure out how the string quartet has changed over time from the early classical era to the late 20th century. So in regards to like an in-person class, a lot of what I would be gearing you guys up to doing is, obviously listening identification, which we've done a lot of with rhythm and texture, and we're not going to leave those 2 subjects aside. We are definitely going to continue talking about texture and rhythm. Believe it or not, we're going to hear a lot of the same things and ideas reiterated. The idea of listening to homophonic texture first and foremost, with a little bit of heterophonic texture mixed in, and a lot of instances of, believe it or not, like reoccurring metric pulses, so simple meter and compound meter, less so phasing and other sort of advents of the 20th century that we covered in our minimalist talk. So we're gonna talk about just one particular instrumental family and 3 instruments within that instrumental family. Well, we'll talk about a 4th one. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and toggle over to my lecture notes so you guys can read along with what I am speaking about. Hold on for a moment. Okay, here we go. So the survey of the string quartet, we're gonna cover it from the classical era to the 20th century. So like I said, the string quartet is an ensemble of 4 players, quartet, 4. There are other names for chamber ensembles. A chamber ensemble is very specifically a group that does not require a conductor. So a chamber ensemble can be a duo, a trio, a quartet, a quintet, a sextet, a septet, an octet, a nontet, perhaps. But the qualifier is that, like, again, a chamber ensemble typically doesn't require a conductor. So a string quartet is a kind of chamber ensemble. Chamber ensemble is a looser, more broad term. String quartet is a very specific kind of chamber ensemble. Specifically, the string quartet is always made up of 2 violins, which are divided out violin 1 and violin 2. One plays the upper part of the, generally the melody. The bottom part usually is also taking the melodic burden, but usually gets the lower part if it happens to be broken up, i.e. call and response. And viola and cello generally are the support team, the one that creates accompaniment. That's not to say that's the only thing that you can do with the string quartet. I'm just giving you guys the roles that are generally given to the ensemble, specifically in the beginning part of the era, the classical era, that is. So there's another member of the string family that's not a part of the string quartet, and that is the double bass. The double bass, it's a little bit too slow moving, although 20th century repertoire certainly challenges that idea. But historically, the double bass was not like a quick moving creature, and otherwise can generally be covered by the cello range. So the double bass is is the string family instrument that is not invited to the string quartet. All string instruments in the string family are chordophones. So chordophones create sound with string. And the idea here is that a string is amplified in some way. First off, it's set into motion, usually by plucking it or bowing it. And that vibration, where the string is set into motion, is amplified by the use of a resonating body. In this case, the resonating bodies of the string instruments all look very similar and have a similar shape. They all like sort of look a little bit like a body, curvaceous one. And so these are instruments that have a great deal of blend to them because they're made out of the same shape. They're tuned at the same interval. Sometimes it's very, very difficult to hear where the violin starts and stops and where the viola begins, for example. Same idea between the viola and the cello. So because of this great timbral blend, we have some interesting compositional possibilities that we'll encounter within the string quartet. What I've included over here is a diagram of what the traditional orchestral layout would be like. Notice that the string instruments over here are all shaded and are placed to the forefront of the stage. Part of this is for acoustic reasons. Acoustically, string instruments are not don't quite project as well as woodwinds or brass instruments, and therefore are placed at the forefront of the stage. The other one is sort of historical. They're the first instruments that were to have been that were perfected, and for that reason are the sort of biggest representation within the orchestral repertoire. So a lot of the most memorable melodies that we listen to that are part of symphonies and tone poems, for example, are usually covered by the string instruments, more specifically the violins. There are other instrumental families that are part of the orchestra. The other instrumental families include the woodwind family. Instruments within that family, there's the flute, the clarinet, the oboe, and the bassoon. We're not going to talk about any woodwind instruments, but it's a very diverse family because they use a variety of different mouthpieces, from single reeds to double reeds to splitting the air column. And the instruments are made out of a grand variety of materials, giving them a lot of timbral distinction from instrument to instrument. We have the brass family. Instruments within that family: the trumpet, the trombone, the tuba, and the horn. Everything that's listed here, by the way, are shorthands or abbreviations for the instruments that you would find in an orchestral score. Brass instruments, they all use the same kind of lip position in relationship to the mouthpiece, and use a technique that's called buzzing, like pursing your lips and creating friction based on the air that's flowing through the lips in the outward direction. So that's the main contributor to the sound for brass instruments. Trumpets use valves, trombones use a slide, tuba and horn also use valves, but they have just kind of different valve structures to them. Percussion family is further divided into two subcategories: mallet percussion instruments and auxiliary percussion instruments. Mallet percussion instruments can all play pitch versus auxiliary instruments, which are usually non-pitched. We're going to talk a little bit about pitch later on in the semester, but to kind of go over what I mean by pitched and non-pitched. My desk. It's non-pitched. I couldn't like take a piano keyboard and play a note that relates to this particular sound. On the other hand, the notes on the piano keyboard are indeed pitched. We have 12 individual pitch classes, 12 individual notes that reiterate in different octaves or different registers. So it's kind of like having 12 unique colors and then shades of those different colors. Like if the note C is the color red, there's different C's that occur on the piano keyboard. They are all different shades or hues of that red, that base. Again, we're going to talk about that in such great detail later on as well. Good. Okay. The keyboard family is sometimes grouped into the percussion family. Keyboard family includes instruments like the piano, the harpsichord, the organ, the melodica, the celeste, the MIDI keyboard, anything that has a keyboard component to it, meaning that there's a third-party mechanism that is involved in the sound production. So those are the instrumental families that operate within the orchestra, but we're just going to take a look at this shaded group for today, just the string family, and very specifically the string family where we just have one representation from each of these blocks. Otherwise, in an orchestra, we have multiple violin ones, multiple violin twos, violas, cellos, double basses, etc. And of course, no double bass in the string quartet. Very good. The big thing, the big takeaway for today's lecture, my big thesis, is that the string quartet evolves over time. How does it evolve? Initially, we start out in the classical era with something that's very easy to consume. Violins are, for the most part, fulfilling the role of the melody, viola and cello, the accompaniment. Easy, predictable. Over time, the other instruments of the string quartet, like the viola and the cello, get more agency. They sometimes get to play melody more often. It's not just about the two violins. So we have sort of an increase in complexity of texture, roughly, over time. So we're moving kind of homophonic to something that's more maybe heterophonic and polyphonic as we get into the 20th century, or at least things that are more texturally diverse. And the same thing is going to happen with rhythm and meter. So in the classical era, we like to listen to a lot of time that is metrically regular. In the Romantic era, we seem to incorporate that metric regularity, but the sense of ambiguity with it. So rubato generally makes an appearance here. Rubato, that sort of pushing and pulling of time. And then in the 20th century, much like we heard in our minimalist examples, we have kind of experiments that happen in rhythm there. So in general, we get sort of an increase in complexity. We also hear that in regards to extended techniques. So timbrally, we also have increased complexity over time. How does this manifest? With extended techniques. So extended techniques right over here. An extended technique is using an instrument in a non-traditional way. There are some instrumental techniques that are more novel than others. Probably the first extended technique to exist within the string quartet is what we call pizzicato, or otherwise abbreviated as P-I-Z-Z with a dot. So pizzicato means to pluck the strings. Creates a somewhat percussive technique. Later on in the 20th century, a composer by the name of Bela Bartok was interested in using something we call a snap pizzicato. Snapping or pulling the string so far away from the instrument that it actually snaps back and hits the fingerboard, creating a very percussive and almost non-pitched event. Following up with that, we can also do percussive effects on the body of the instrument, like tapping it works better if it's on a larger instrument, or changing your bowing positions while playing, moving further away from your body or further towards it, sul tasto or sul ponticello, creates a different kind of timbral effects. Example of like sul tasto and sul ponticello is like the idea of me speaking naturally and maybe me speaking with my nose stuffed up. So like I'm speaking, but like one has a much more timbrally nasal sound. This is kind of equivalent to something like a sul ponticello on a string instrument. We can also do things like scordatura, falsely tuning the instrument. We'll show examples of that later on, or glissando, where we're seamlessly going from one note to another note. So like mew, glissando down. These techniques really only arrive in the Romantic era and on. So one of the key components to this class, and I'll stop screen sharing now, one of the key components to this class is for you to be able to do what I call a blind listening, where you listen to a piece and you, just based on listening to it, you can make some pretty good assessments as to when the piece of music was written. And one of the kind of like hallmarks of a piece that's from the Romantic era, the 20th century, tends to be the presence of extended techniques, using an instrument in a non-traditional way. The more out there, the more likely it's going to be from the 20th or 21st century. The Romantic era, though, starts to incorporate it, mostly because the Romantic era composers are very interested in this idea of what we call musical storytelling. We're going to cover that as a very interesting topic shortly as a part of this unit with tone poems and program symphonies of the Romantic era. Okay, so the other three components of this lecture, I'm going to divide it into the classical era, so that's going to be part 2. The Romantic era is part 3, and the 20th century is part 4. So each of these takes just 2 listening examples for each of the next sections. Here's the thing, string quartet music is probably fairly new for you. I really hope that my video doesn't get chopped up by YouTube for copyright stuff, which, by the way, apologies. Most of my 20th century popular music stuff got by. The stuff that didn't got cut from my video by YouTube. I know that makes it kind of frustrating to listen to, but that's one of the reasons why I make sure to go through details about the listening example before and after, so that if it gets cut, you can still understand what's happening. As always, please feel free to leave me questions in the comment section. I get a little email notification about them. I will answer them as quickly as possible. So without further ado, I will see you guys for part 2. We're going to talk about 2 composers that are sort of incredibly emblematic of the classical era. The first one, Franz Joseph Haydn, the very sort of fun classical era composer, and then of course Mozart. So stay tuned for part 2, coming to you soon.